Okay. Oh, can you hear me at all at the back? Yep. Okay. That's good. Okay. Well, the first question is, it's for me, for Steve. Apparently there's debate around the usefulness of screening spirometry as part of a health surveillance programme. What are your views on that?
Right, thank you for the question. I mean, our view is that you need to undertake both a validated respiratory questionnaire and spirometry as well. There was a bit of debate that came out of this around the time of COVID in particular, but our expectation is that occupational health providers have returned to performing health surveillance as they normally would do, which means a questionnaire and spirometry. The advantage of the spirometry is you can look at serial results, that's the first thing. The second thing is it can show abnormalities which may be indicative of occupational asthma as well. So our view is that you do need both. The caveat to that slightly is if you've implemented a system of health surveillance for a period of time and take appropriate advice from an occupational health professional, you may decide that your risks are well enough controlled such that you can step back your health surveillance in certain circumstances, and then in that case a respiratory questionnaire may be adequate, but certainly for most types of respiratory health surveillance we'd expect both to be performed.
Okay, thank you very much. Question for David. In regard to chronic occupational lung disease associated with welding fume exposure, is there the concept of a latent period? Is that something that applies, do you think?
Yeah, it's another great question. So Steve talked primarily in his example about occupational asthma, which is recognised to be a consequence of stainless steel welding and probably other types of welding, and that typically has a latency of a couple of years. But what I chose, obviously on purpose, not to talk about in any great detail because not much is known genuinely, is that COPD is probably also associated in certain cases with welding. That's a very, very long latent illness. And so it's a fascinating exposure that has lots of different types of health endpoints associated with it. And I think Steve's right on it there to think about it in relation to the short-term latency illness. But actually, if you want my personal, not HSE's view, I think we need to be worried about long-term welding fume causing COPD as well. But the evidence at the moment is a bit mixed.
Okay, thank you. And whilst you have the microphone, a question from the floor for yourself and or Steve. And the question is, what advice are you offering around PPV vaccine for employers working in welding? And does the employer have to arrange administration of vaccine, or is it available from the GP?
So I'm going to hand over to Steve, but I would just say that pneumococcal pneumonia is a recognised complication of being exposed to welding fume, and it's probably the iron that does something to preventing you from being immune to that infection. So there is definitely an issue, and some welders around the world die from pneumococcal pneumonia. I think vaccination doesn't prevent you catching pneumococcus, it prevents you developing the invasive illness, which is the really serious form of that pneumonia, which can kill people. There being some, each country will have its general advice. My view is, personally, if I was a welder, I would like to have it, but Steve will probably give you the up-to-date view about what HSE actually recommends.
Thanks, David. It hasn't actually changed, so it's still the same. We do have some guidance on the website in respect of immunising welders with the pneumococcal vaccine, and this came from various pieces of research that have been done in looking at pneumococcal pneumonia invasive disease in welders, and the Joint Committee on Vaccinations recognised that and advised that immunisation should be undertaken or can be undertaken. I think the important thing is to think about is your controls to make sure that they are in place, and to make sure you've got adequate information instruction for your welders as well, so they can think about these things. But it's something that can be offered. But really, the thing to be thinking about here is control of your workplace exposures, and where there is still potential risk, then you can consider vaccination, and would recommend that you discuss that with your occupational health provider in terms of how you go about making the arrangements for that. But there is I can't remember the exact document number, there's quite a nice flow chart on how to consider this on the HCGP website, which I commend to you.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are any other questions from the floor, will you? Yeah. Okay, this is for a vet. And the question is, if we have achieved exposure below the WEL, is this enough to comply?
In the case of welding fume, no. It's a category 1 carcinogen. So for carcinogens and asthmagens, which also causes occupational asthma, you have to control as far below the well as is reasonably practical.
Okay, thank you. This one's for Janine. Is it okay to have less detail in the report if I only have a simple system and not a complicated multi-branched system?
No, the HSG 258 is very clear on what needs to be included in the report, so it doesn't matter whether you have a small system or one with multi-branches. It'll just be a longer report if there's more to your system, but all of that information does need to be there.
Okay, thank you. And for Katrina, if compliance cannot be achieved by the date given on the improvement notice, what action will HSENI take?
Okay, we're taking a very reasonable approach with regards to timeframes. We're looking at each company on a one-to-one basis. We will take into consideration, obviously, if there's a delay in time or lead times, the shipment of and supply of materials or systems, but also to take into consideration that we can issue a notice of extension depending on those considerations, and providing that there's a valid reason given and you just haven't done anything, then potentially we can extend that notice.
Okay, thank you. And this one is for Steve on health surveillance. If an employer has a functional weld fume LEV in place, which is used and maintained fully, is it still a requirement to carry out health surveillance?
Thank you. Quite a common question that in the round in terms of when do I do health surveillance or not, and I can't answer the question based on the information I've got there, because it depends on circumstances. The two things I would really sort of think about is getting occupational health input to look at your risks, your controls, and whether or not there's still a reasonable likelihood of disease developing under those particular conditions of exposure. The second thing I would say, though, is that RPE is often used in welding, and as I said in my talk, where RPE is used, it doesn't fail to safe, and therefore you still may require health surveillance as well. So the answer is it depends, I'm afraid, but you need to get competent advice to look at that, and if you're not sure, you may have to you may consider undertaking health surveillance for a period of time to make sure everything is okay, but you need to take that advice from your occupational health provider.
Okay, thank you. Steve again, still in the spotlight here. This question, for fitness to work, is there a need to consider excluding or adding additional protection for smokers who are welding, brackets, as some other countries do for asbestos workers who are also smokers?
Again, really interesting question. The answer is, in its starkest form, no. But what we'd expect to see as part of any sort of health promotion campaign is to encourage your workers to stop smoking. So either that be through workplace routes. Certainly, if somebody is undergoing health surveillance, I'd expect the occupational health provider to be counselling the worker to stop smoking for all the other reasons why they should stop smoking, not in the least from potential for interaction with any workplace exposures. So, but no, you wouldn't stop somebody from working if they were a smoker, but they do need to be encouraged to stop and access the appropriate services to help them do that.
Okay, thank you. This particular question isn't directed at anybody in particular, so I'll read it out, and whoever wants to provide an answer, feel free. The question is, for many in the room, this is an overwhelming problem. For many in this environment, making the wrong investment will be, well, I think it's expensive. It looks like existential, but I'm sure that can't be right. But anyway, we know that's why it's good for people and it's good in the law. But what one thing should people do today? What should they go to get started, and who should they speak to?
Do you have LEV in place? If you have your LEV already in place, I would start at the beginning, go around it, have a look to see how your workers are working with it. Is it controlling the fume? Simple techniques like a dust lamp, smoke tubes will let you see how effective it is. Then the next step would, I think would be to contact somebody who is an LEV provider, or contact somebody from with an occupational hygiene background. I don't think that the responsibility lies with one person, because when you're designing LEV, it takes the employer needs to know what he's controlling. The designer and supplier need to know what they're providing to control the system, and then how to commission it. So I can't give you an exact answer, but have a look at the systems you have in place, see if they're effective. If not, get them redesigned. If you're starting from scratch, then a ventilation engineer and an occupational hygienist in combination. It doesn't cost anything it shouldn't cost anything to talk to these people. And what BOH and ILEV had a conference recently, and they talked about this RABI 2020 work plan, and it's really for building design, but they said that it could be applied to designing any sort of system. And it's a work program that takes you from your initial specification, talking it through, putting it on the paper, putting it in practice, and commissioning it at the end. And through various stages you review it and get back to what you need to do. And if it's not working, try a prototype. If it's not working, try something else until you get what suits yourselves.
Okay, thanks, Yvette. Anybody else want to add in something?
Just even from Heister, I'm going to a manager to ask them for maybe tens of thousands of pounds, so you do want to get it right. We did work with LEV. I don't know anybody from LEV's here, Lever, but you'll find even using our maintenance team, using your engineers to sort of trial, pilot. We actually set up a workshop. We trialled a few things that would actually work, designing certain hoods, having to go and using, the likes of fire retardant curtains. There's some things you can test yourselves, and then from the pilot, then you do need to go to somebody to sort of calibrate it and give you some kind of confidence, yes, it's going to perform in real life. But it's a hard one. We spent, for instance, or even torch extraction, there's 4 new torches we've used from the first concept of it. It didn't work. And, rather than give up, we waited for a while. We used other LEV systems, then went back to the torch system, then we came away from it. Now we're back to the torch, and to be honest, they're just actually catching up. Engineers just actually catching up with the right type of equipment to deal with fumes. So at this point in time now, there should be enough information out there to guide you. And if you want, obviously, some help from ourselves, we've had several years' experience of bespoken every system to suit our processes. So if you need any help, certainly we can pass that on.
Okay, this one's for David. Professor Fishwick, in the tin case, it was mentioned that only an X-ray can pick up certain illnesses. How can this be identified earlier if there are no symptoms?
So great question. The answer is it can't be. So there are various conditions that are only picked up by X-ray, for example, silicosis. Some people may tell you that lung function can do that, but that's incorrect. So to diagnose silicosis, you need to do an X-ray, and the same with stenosis, and the same generally with the dust-related problems, pneumoconiosis. Lung function will pick up other things, but again, it's just taking, as Steve and others have mentioned, competent advice around how best to pick up the illnesses that you're likely or possibly going to see once you've looked at your hazard and the associated risks. But there are specific investigations for each lung disease, and they're not always the same.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, that concludes the panel question and answer session. We've come in pretty much on time. On your behalf, can we thank the speakers from this morning's conference? Thanks for being a great audience, and I'm going to hand over now to Derek, who's chairman of the HSE, to give the closing remarks.
Thank you, Ken. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, Derek Martin, I'm currently chair of HSE&I. My background is the construction industry. I spent 40 years starting as a junior engineer and working up through various supervisory and managerial levels up to director level in one of the construction companies in Northern Ireland. From very early on, I was aware of the, I suppose, call them the physical risks associated with welding. As part of my job at various stages, I was involved in procurement of welded products, structural steel, architectural metalwork, that sort of thing, and the management of installation. And there was occasions when we did welding on site for various reasons, either associated with that or even as sort of temporary works. And I was very aware of the fact that welding was dangerous to your eyes, and it was a hot work procedure which could cause fire and other risks associated with hot works. I will confess that I had no awareness at all of the risks to health associated with from welding fumes until we in HSE&I started the Welding Fumes initiative some months ago. So I'm sure that everyone in the room, like myself, has now a far better understanding of the risks associated with the fumes than when we gathered this morning. We have listened to some excellent talks by our contributors this morning, and I'd like to start by thanking Professor Ken Adley for chairing today's event so expertly and getting us to the finishing line more or less on time, Ken. Well done. I'd like to thank you for your time today, Ken. HSE&I is extremely pleased to be working in partnership with the Faculty of Occupational Medicine on this initiative, and we look forward to many years of further collaboration in the future. In order to tackle a problem, it's first necessary to understand it. And I would also like to extend our thanks, as always, to our Chief Medical Advisor, Professor David Fishwick. David, thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience once again, and for informing us so clearly about the risks to health associated with welding fumes, and for describing their effects on our lungs and bodies. Identifying a problem is, of course, only the starting point. What most people in the room, I think, want to see, well, what are the solutions to this? And I would like to thank Katrina Murphy, Yvette Boys and Janine Spears from HSE&I for pointing out the management issues that need to be considered when addressing this problem. I'd like to thank Dr. Steve Foreman from HSEGB for illustrating the importance of health surveillance and how it can be used to monitor the effectiveness of the controls that are put in place. And also Ian McElveen from Heister Yale for his very informative case study and how Heister Yale have practically managed a number of the issues that we've talked about today. As regulators, we have a statutory duty to enforce the regulations as set out in the 1978 order. However, the point of the regulations are to prevent serious injury and ill health to employees in the workplace. The key word here is prevent. We all react more positively if we know why we are being asked to do something. And this is why events such as this are so important. So I'd like to thank the team at HSE&I, Martin Rafferty and the Occupational Health team, Anne Boylan and the manufacturing team, and Danielle Mills and the communications team, who together set up today's event and who have been driving the welding initiative over the last number of months. Of course, every team needs a manager, so I'd also extend my thanks to Nikki Monson for her guiding hand throughout as this event was organised. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for your attendance today. The large turnout reflects the seriousness with which you are taking this issue and your acknowledgement of your responsibilities to manage and mitigate these risks appropriately. I hope you've enjoyed this event today and that you will take away not only an appreciation of the risks associated with welding fumes, but also that there are practical solutions available to deal with them. And I would encourage you all to continue these discussions and to share good practice and knowledge with each other in the future. It only remains for me to thank the hotel for looking after us so well and for the lunch which we are about to have. So thank you for your attention, enjoy your lunch and have a safe journey home. Thank you all. Thank you.